So you went and got that new guitar today.
Got a guitar.
All right.
First guitar in 11 years.
11 years. Now, wait, is that the first guitar of any kind in 11 years?
I want to say,
yeah. Or like leading worship guitar kind of thing?
No, I want to say that's the first guitar I've bought of any kind in 11 years. I did some trades, I guess. But yeah, I think that's.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely, it's the first guitar that I've bought that I'm going to be, leading with. That guitar I've had. I mean, everybody's seen it. You know, it's just splintering to bits. You know, and I just, guitars are expensive. It's tough, but at some point, it's just like this is my career. This is what I do every single week.
Yep.
For, so.
2 services a week now.
Yeah, 2 services a week at the very least. So it's just time. So yeah, it was a good week for me.
So what'd you get?
So I mean, it was fun. It's actually funny. I sent a meme of like there's this meme where this guy is talking to this girl, like he's talking, and you can just see her face. She's completely uninterested, and then people fill in the bubble with different things, like whatever their niche thing is. And I sent it to some friends, and I put all this information about the guitar because I've been over and over and over this. So I got what's called a Martin 00028. 28 is
28.
Yeah, 28 is one level down from their highest, like non-custom guitar.
So what 28 mean? Is that inches in some way?
No,
or just a number?
I don't know what the numbers represent.
Just a random number.
They have 15s, 18s, 20.
Yeah.
23s, 28s, and then 35s. And so all of those represent different levels. And then obviously they have like custom shop, the stuff that's like 15,000, stuff like that. And so I got the 28, which is a great guitar. It's a small body guitar. I just could go on and on.
Okay, all right.
Sitka
That's
spruce
like
top.
me talking about golf clubs or
exactly.
Talking about
cars. We're gonna lose our audience real fast if you let me get on guitars. So we'll get off that quick. But anyway, it's a good week. I have to install my own electronics in it so I can plug it in at church.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be learning a little bit of woodworking over the next week.
Oh, no. Are you doing it yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to do it myself.
No.
Yeah,
Let's take it to that guy down in Maumee.
No, I'm very confident. I want it for free. I want to install it for free. So, yeah, it's been a good week for me. Hey, guys, welcome to the Life Chapel Podcast.
Yeah, glad you're here tonight.
I am your host, Grant Perry. I'm here with the pastor, the Reverend, the man with the plan sometimes, Jonathan Perry.
Yeah, sometimes.
The man with the plan on a good day.
Well, this is true.
So it's been a good weekend.
Not every day's a good day, so I'll take that.
We are both in recovery, that's for sure. It was a busy weekend for both of us.
Yeah, so this weekend, your mom and I, Sharon and I, went down to Louisville.
Louisville?
Yep.
It's not Louisville. It's not
Louisville. Nope. Not Louisville. Not Louisville. Louisville. And my sister and brother-in-law, the Pretties, had their 10th anniversary. So 10 years ago, they moved back to Louisville, started their church, and so your mom and I got to go down and preach. And
we went down there and helped them.
We did
rehab. Was that the first building when they moved back to Louisville?
No, that would have been they were at a firehouse. No, they were at a barn first.
Really?
And then
we
didn't see the barn. That was just like a.
Hey, Nat's on. Louisville
awesome.
In the house. Come
Louisville's in the house. Spell it right. Take that S out of there. Drop a couple of
Louisville. Yeah.
So. But then they went to a firehouse that they rented, and then we were at the third building that was actually kind of their first permanent house. Or church, and then we built the platform and the risers in the back, and it was a garage.
Yeah.
Remember the garage door was behind the stage, and they hung curtains there.
Here's the question. What's wrong with our family?
I know.
All of us. What happened? What trauma made us all feel like we just have to constantly be in a project? Like, what happened?
Well, and that was part of not the joke, but the story is they've been like either remodeling or fixing something up.
Yeah, and we've been the same way for
time.
20 years. I mean, it's just been a constant remodel.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So they got a really great location now, and it was fun. So we went and we took my mom and dad to lunch at Cheesecake Factory.
All right. That's what I'm talking about.
Just me and Sharon and them, so we could chill.
All 185 pages of that menu. Good.
Well, it's on a phone too now because they're not handing them out. Yeah. So, Then Sharon and I went to the hotel, checked in, and then immediately went over and met Steve and Suzanne at this place called Becca de Beppo's or something. It's an Italian place.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean,
I don't know what it is, but I know you didn't say it right.
Yes, I did. I've been practicing that.
Yeah.
It's Italian for the back room or the little room or the room with no windows, something like that. That's what it means.
I wouldn't make a restaurant called
Beppo.
I wouldn't make a restaurant called the Room with No Windows. That's a little
But it
freaky.
has no windows.
Really?
That's the whole thing.
The whole thing really actually has no windows.
It has no windows because it's decorated real eclectic. And,
yeah. Okay.
But it's very Italian. But they bring out like we ordered. It's all family style.
Oh, gotcha.
So they brought out a lasagna that was. I'm telling you, I'm not lying. It was like this long and like this thick, and you just cut it in slices and you just hand it out to everybody at the table.
Oh man,
it was so good.
That's awesome.
Then I mean, we just went and okay. So Natalie gave it to us.
Buca di Beppo.
Yeah, I was close.
I feel like that. I feel like neither of us are saying it right. I know it's like
So-
Buccia di Beppo, something like that.
So we got
Anyway,
up Sunday morning, went to church, and then went and ate again.
Wow.
So
That's
we ate
unbelievable.
and went to church. That's what we did. We ate and went to church. But yeah, it was great. It was a good
That's
time. Then what happened here? You guys had 2 services, and on the way home, your mom and I watched
Yeah.
the replay of the podcast of the online service. Man, it was
a crazy
Now, were
weekend.
you on fire as much in the first service as you were online?
I think I was more on fire in the first service.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Well,
I mean,
that's hard to repeat, man.
people
When you
can
got
comment
that-
and let us know, but I really think the first service was hot. I think I was funnier in the first service, or maybe people were just responding more. I don't know. But yeah, I thought there were a couple of things I said in the first service that I wish I would have said in the second service. A couple of jokes I missed in the second service that I did sort of off the cuff. I was trying to remember one of the stories. Oh, the double feature story. So I was talking about in the first service, and I didn't say this in the second service, but I was talking about how we used to have worship services that would just take off. Right?
Yeah.
And then you would just worship the whole service.
Yeah.
And it
No
was just,
preaching.
it was awesome, especially when you were a kid. You know, maybe in the flesh, but it was like, this is great. No,
Yes.
no sitting down, and we danced the whole
Well,
time.
that's
you know?
when
and it was
as a pastor, and I'll let you get back to your story, but as a pastor, that's when you know you're in trouble when everybody says, that was the best service we've had in a long time.
Yeah.
The pastor didn't preach.
right.
It's
Exactly.
like, what am I, chopped liver?
Yeah, and people don't do that
So
anymore.
what's the
you know?
double feature?
And so what I said was, that was the best. But the worst was when you think you're having a service that where the preacher isn't preaching, and you worship for an hour and a half, and it's going, and it's a riot, and the preacher gets up, and you're like, oh great, he's ready to dismiss us, and he goes, open your Bibles, and you're like, oh, this isn't a worship service, it's a double feature.
Yeah,
So then you're going to
exactly
be there all
right.
day long.
You're going to be a while.
Yeah. So that
Oh,
that was always the worst, when you thought you were getting a really good movie, and instead it was a double feature. So
That's funny.
yeah, but that was I think the only joke I missed in the second service. I really overall I think it hit pretty well. It was very different for me.
Yeah.
It's very different for me. I didn't have a PowerPoint. I didn't have a
Exactly.
whole lot of notes. I didn't have. I just had a couple of, so the way I introduced it was with the idea that I enjoyed the assignment. After we talked about this last week on the podcast, I enjoyed the assignment of coming back to worship, because worship is a huge part of my life. I talked about those stories, but sometimes it just gets away from you in some way.
Yeah.
It just kind of escapes you. And so I've been really focused on the Word lately, really focused on learning and brushing up, or I don't know what you would call it, but just becoming a more well-read person.
Right. Just expanding your thoughts.
Yeah.
Because you do get that. It's like your mom mentioned a few weeks ago, that candy stick where you just kind of preach the same 2 or 3 thoughts over and over, just from a different angle.
Yeah.
And that can become real. It's lazy preaching, where pastors just kind of get lazy or comfortable. Maybe lazy is a hard word, but comfortable, and they just kind of like, I know how to preach that thought, and they just preach it from a different angle. So we've always been trying to expand ourselves and our thoughts and what God's calling us to say. And
so that's been my focus lately, is reading more, learning more about context of the scripture, all of that stuff. And I really enjoy that stuff, but having to do this week forced me back into sort of that like, wait a second, but do you love him? Kind of was the question that God was like really impressing upon me throughout the week. Is like, but do you still love it? Do you still love it with all your heart? And so so that's what I got up to share, and I read the text conversation that I had with Ramona. I know she's out there watching right now, but yeah, I shared the text conversation, and that was really my heart. I didn't know how to get what I wanted. Yeah. I didn't know how to achieve it because it's not something that I think is achievable in sort of the classic sense of the word. It's not you do these 3 steps and then people really get their hearts involved. And so I just tried to bring something that would encourage them, and
so good.
Light some fires.
Yeah, so, it was a good message. And I love the personal stories. I think that matters. I think that's important for people to hear those personal stories, because if we're not careful, people will just see us as kind of robotic, just kind of going through those 3 steps and, that final prayer and not really catch on to what who we are as people. And people need to see that personal side. Yeah. That's why every so often I'll tell the story of being a slow learner, or I'll talk about some, early ministry, mess up or something, just so people don't forget, hey, I'm just a human. I'm just trying to do something here. Right.
Well, you've always been big on story, and I think that's one of the most powerful things people bring to the table. But I think there's there's a way to tell story that works better than, or there's some ways to tell stories that work better than other ways. Like, kind of what I mean is sometimes people try and prove something by story. Yeah. So they'll say, well, I know that the Bible says this because when I was blank, I experienced blank, or something like that. And I think sometimes that's the wrong way to use a story, but I think, I don't know, what's the right way to use a story?
Well, the right way to use a story is to relate.
Right.
Not to manipulate.
Ooh, say it again. Somebody put it in the comments. Come on.
So
the right way to use a story is to relate.
That's so hot.
Did you feel the virtue leave your body? So to relate, not to manipulate. That's good.
What you said.
That's it. Yeah.
I mean, really.
But
I can't get over what
that came out, right.
Yeah, but if you're not careful, you'll use a story. So, in other words, when we would go to camp, okay,
and we're talking church camp,
right?
Because Perry's don't go to no regular camp. We don't go to space camp. We don't go to band camp. We go to church camp.
This is true, but there's always that one preacher that preaches that story when he gets to the end of the message. He talks about that young man that sat on the back row that didn't come forward, got in his car and drove down the road, crossed the railroad tracks. Yeah. And that was the last thing that ever, it was it's this horrific story to manipulate people to make a momentary decision that they're not ready to carry out. And it manipulates rather than telling a story of just,
to relate to people's, to relate to people where people are at.
Yeah.
Not to try and force them into to get somewhere where you
want
them
to be.
Yeah,
that's true. That's good.
Man, that's a good. We need to put that down somewhere.
Yeah, that may be a good leadership thing to talk about sometime. Is just because we all have a story,
right?
And I talk about using your story through various means, whether it's teaching or, when you're relating to people or just in life, just use your story. And how to use your story.
Yeah.
Because that's important. Is you never want to use it to manipulate. You want to use it to
relate.
I forgot.
Relate,
already.
Not manipulate. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Because, I think a lot of times people will.
But I felt like Sunday, that's what you did.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, those stories really related to people.
Yeah. I felt pretty good about it. I think worshiping has always been heavy on my heart. It's always been, I think, primarily what I'm called to is to drive people to worship, because I think, I think maybe God gave me some revelations, even though I probably couldn't articulate them and, maybe haven't even done a great example of exemplifying them. I got some revelations, I feel like, early on about the nature of God and who he is and what it means that there is a God, and that really drove me to make worship sort of my primary focus. And that story that I told about when I broke my leg and I was going through withdrawals. I mean, that's true. Like
that is. I was there.
And every time I'm in sort of the darkest place, my only thing, the other thing I kept saying, and I've done this several times when I've been in like sort of hard or dark places, is that I want to be useful to God. Like I want to be useful. Like that's the desperation of my heart, is just to to be useful to God.
Yeah.
You know? So
that's really, really should be the cry of everybody. But back to your stories.
Yes.
The reason that I felt like your stories were so effective is you used them in a way that you let it be a little bit self-deprecating in that you were talking about, when you were doing the box and jump and kind of making it light, but at the same time you were hitting
and it was
hard.
Embarrassing. It really is an embarrassing story, the stuff
but it's
that you
a
do
great
as a kid.
story. And then I think when you talked about the snow story with the guitar that I've heard a number of times, but you always bring in that I'm a little dramatic.
It was dramatic.
So you kind of take the edge off. Like if you don't do this, you're not a real worshiper. You got to throw yourself out into the snow.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of bring it back to give people a way to say, that's your story. I need to find my story, but it doesn't have to look like your story.
Yeah.
And I think that's
one of the things that actually I got from church camp is I always felt like the stories that people would tell were like just so melodramatic. They just, every single one of them was like this massive like melodrama. Like I threw myself on the ground at 4 a.m. in my bathroom and I did this, and it's like, and it's maybe all of those things actually happened, but it was like everybody had those stories. So then what it produced, I felt like, was a bunch of kids who were constantly trying to have that story.
Yeah,
who were constantly trying to have these,
go to that level.
Yeah, it had to be like, and then it would extend from that to and we've talked about this a number of times in the podcast. Like it was like, everybody seemed to have the story where like I was on crack cocaine, and I was on top of a roof about to jump with whatever those fire bombs are to throw it at a child, or whatever. Just like the most horrendous thing that could ever happen. And it was just like, and so then I feel like a lot of kids grew up feeling like they had to have that for it to be real. And so I always try and say, it was a melodramatic moment, but it's just a melodramatic moment. You don't have to go and throw your guitar in the snow or something like that.
Somebody's got to go buy a guitar right now because they don't even have a guitar to throw in the snow.
I've got 6. None of them can go in the snow now, though.
This is true.
Yeah.
So what did you not get to say about worship, or what thoughts came after the fact that you were like, that's probably something I should have said or could have said about worship?
You know what? I just thought, I don't think there's particularly anything I didn't get to say. I thought about going in a few different directions. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of one of the things I was thinking a lot more about is I thought about maybe taking my guitar with me and playing throughout and singing some songs. I've done that a few times.
You've done that.
And I don't ever want it to feel gimmicky, and so that's why I didn't do it, even though I would have enjoyed it, is to sort of teach and then go into a song and then teach and go into a song, So I thought about doing that. I thought about going a little bit more into David's story. And I actually thought about starting off the service with the Hallelujah song. It's not actually a Christian song. It's like on Shrek, but there's that line in it that says, I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you, or whatever. And it goes on. But I thought about talking about, sometimes even secular songs and secular people nail something. And I think in that line, there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. What was the secret chord? And talk about the broken and the contrite heart.
Wow, that would have been so good.
Yeah, and that I think
is the secret chord?
Yeah, what is the secret? And I think was a little more. I don't know. That's a little more. You know what I mean? It's a little more tight.
That's
I guess of
interesting,
a message.
Though.
What's the
you'd have to
chord?
really hone in on that.
And the secret chord is a broken and a contrite heart, and talking about how all of our worship just means nothing if it's if we're doing it just out of obligation. But I don't think, as I was thinking about that, I don't think that's our church's problem.
Right.
I don't think
our church has a sincere heart of worship.
Yeah, I think it's sincere almost to the place of, and this is kind of, I almost went the opposite direction. It's sincere almost to the place of people don't respond because they feel in some way like it's insincere if they were to just act out a little outlandishly or move and dance or something like that. I think our church has such that heart of sincerity that people don't want to act out if it's not coming from a sincere place. And so kind of what I tried to push is that is a learned behavior, but it doesn't make it insincere.
Right. And I love the fact that you brought in the learned behavior.
Yeah.
That was such a good point, because worship and the style of worship is a learned behavior.
Right.
I mean, if you're raised in a quiet, sit still, hum, and meditate type of church, you learn that kind of worship, and then you have a tendency to look at all other worship and say, that's not worship, because that's not the way I do it,
Right.
And vice versa. If you learn to worship in a wild, outrageous, shofar, flags waving, tambourines. And
that's something that I didn't get to, is just the idea of there is no, what would you call it, like non-learned behavior in worship. I think the reason the average unsaved person might come into church and be maybe not as responsive or reactive is because even unsaved people in our culture have a certain idea of what church is. And it's somber, or it's quiet, or it's...
Well, and it depends on what they've been exposed to.
Right.
If they saw something on TV one time. I mean, it could be a 5-minute Benny Hinn crusade where people are falling out and the organ's going and Benny Hinn's singing, and that could be the image burned into their brain.
Right.
Or they went to a Catholic funeral and
they
saw that could be burned into their thought patterns. So you're right.
Yeah, and so the point there is that
very interesting.
We tend to think of learned behavior as insincere, or especially I think within the religious spectrum. And I had this, I think, somewhat false belief for a long time, is that if it was real, it would happen spontaneously, suddenly. That anything that was real with God, it would be like voice from heaven, lightning and thunder, like that type of thing. And coming to understand that no, you have to take a step. You have to take a step in faith that God is going to respond to your faith. And I think that's a really deep biblical principle that not a lot of people get a hold of, is this idea that God always responds to our hearts.
Right.
So this even goes to like a theological term called judicial hardening.
Judicial hardening.
Right. Is like, how did God make Pharaoh's heart hardened? And so people say, well, God made his heart hardened. Like, why would he have? But what they don't understand is that Pharaoh had chances to respond, and he was disobedient and rejected those chances. And so in response to Pharaoh's rejection, God then hardened his heart further.
Gotcha.
Giving him over to his, so things like that. So God's always responding.
Which is what the Bible does talk about. In the New Testament, it talks about the reprobate. It talks about, there's another word for it that's slipping me right now. But basically, people who continually reject God, eventually God just says, I'm just going to leave you out there by yourself.
Right.
I'm just going to leave you alone. So, interesting.
And so so I think God's always responding to us. I think
whether that's positive or negative.
Yeah. And I don't think that's any, and so I think God lets us lead the dance, right? And I don't think that's any comment on God's lack of ability to lead the dance.
Yeah.
He could.
You know what? That'd be a good sermon title.
Yeah.
God lets us lead the dance.
Yeah, lead the dance. Yeah. He could just take control, move our feet, make us do what he wanted us to do, but he has chosen to allow us to make the first move, to lead, to respond. And so I think that's the way it oftentimes works. And so, I think when I'm trying to encourage people to worship, I guess I'm sort of re-preaching the sermon a little bit, but there's some things.
Well, but you're bringing in some other things that that you didn't bring in, at least in the message that we were able to watch.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to double down on some of those things, because I think, like I was saying, we lead the dance. Actually, it kind of slipped me there for a second. It was at the beginning of the sermon. I was talking about. Anyway, it'll come back to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just really wanted people to get a hold of why it's important that's what it was. The idea of worship as a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
and how prevalent that is, and how that's a great message, and that's a true message. Worship is a lifestyle. But, I think that message was pushed so hard that people now enter church sort of with this is kind of unnecessary but nice.
Right.
It's nice that we go to church. It's not necessary because worship is a lifestyle, and I worship with my lifestyle.
COVID, the shutdown of churches, actually gave many of those people permission.
Yeah.
To never go back to church.
Well, and that was happening. Yeah, even before COVID.
It was already happening, and it was like, now I have a
it.
permission slip.
Yeah, yeah.
And the stats are saying from all the people somewhere that are doing some kind of research that 1/3 of congregations will never come back.
Right.
Because they have found they can be Christian, serve Jesus, sit on their couch, and go to 3 churches a Sunday.
Yeah.
If they choose.
Yeah.
If they want.
Yeah.
But it was already kind of happening, like you said, but this is just kind of the permission slip to say, see, we can all do this.
Well, I think it was the culmination of like 3 decades, I feel like, of people preaching.
Yeah.
Church isn't necessary. Pastors are just like you. We're no different. We just happen to have chosen this as our path, and all of these different things that it's just like, and eventually you start to think like, okay, like church isn't necessary. Like you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. Like I'll never forget, God bless him. I don't know him, whatever. But like, Justin Bieber one time, he was asked about going to church and being a Christian. And he's like, well, going to a Taco Bell doesn't make me a taco, and it was like, that first of all, like your metaphors don't even line up. But secondly, also you should go to church, like I don't even know how to deal with that, like about tacos and what. Yeah. But that's how a lot of people think.
Right.
Like that's what a lot of people have been told for decades is that church is just sort of a, it's a kind of a nice thing that you do, but it's like, no, man, church is necessary. Worship is necessary. Together. This is important, and this has been being done for thousands and thousands of years. Like the church has always been a unit, a body, and they've always sang together. They haven't always worshipped in the same way. They haven't always expressed it in the same way, and that's where I admit Life Chapel is unique. But I tried to sort of make the case for why you should, if you're a Life Chapel member, buy into that DNA of physical interaction.
Because we are intense.
Yeah.
And this is what I tell people when you bring guests to Life Chapel, you need to give them a heads up.
Yeah.
That we're pretty intense.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people come in and they're just like snow in the face, like,
whoa,
what in the world is going on? And I think it's so important for people to come in with a little bit of expectation of saying, oh, wow, these people are serious about this.
Yeah.
And when we talk about intense, we don't want to just mean that we're just putting on a high-energy show.
Yeah.
We believe that intensity is engagement.
Yes.
That people should be engaged in worship.
Yeah. And sometimes I think to engage, and that's, I guess, the fine line that I was trying to tell people how to walk there. Sometimes to engage, you have to make a move, even if it feels fake for a moment.
Yeah.
Even if you don't quite believe it, or you don't quite know that you're doing it, or you don't quite, sometimes you just have to make a move. You have to, like at the end of the service, I had everybody lift their hands, because sometimes you just have to do that, do something that makes you feel uncomfortable.
I can't believe that Paul and Silas in the jail, bound hand and foot, with their backs beaten, felt like worshiping.
Right, right.
They had the perfect excuse to say, look, our worship was getting beat for your name, Jesus.
Yeah.
Our worship is that
Wasn't
we're sitting
that
in the prison with our hands in stocks and our feet in bonds, and we're done.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can say over the last 6.5 years with the sickness that I've dealt with, there's been many services where I came and it took everything I had just to show up. But I'm on the front row. I'm the leader of this place. And so therefore, I put myself under the pressure to say, I'm going to physically, actively engage in worship.
Right.
Even if I don't feel like it, because that's what we do.
Absolutely.
And I believe that even if you don't feel like it, you do it anyway, God still honors it. He sees that and he's like, look at that.
Right.
I can do that.
Absolutely. And that's why it's the same when I came out of that surgery and I was still, I was still in those shorts because I couldn't put pants on because I had that big thing on, and I was still probably on Percocet, honestly, but I had them wheel me into the side door because I had to be here. I had to worship. I couldn't do more than 4 weeks. There's no way.
Yeah.
I just had to get back here. And the same. That's why I lead. When I both times I've had to lead with my legs still in a cast, or wheel myself up. It's not because I just can't stand, someone else leading. We have a great team, but it's because I can't stand not worshiping. I mean, this is all I want to do, if I have to do that with a broken leg, I'm just going to have to do it with a broken leg. Like, my body's going to have to get over it.
I just think that matters to God. I think God sees that, and I think that just really raises his attention. Like, wow, somebody better pay attention to this.
Yeah. So let's take a few moments though and talk to the people. What are some of those principles of worship that you would express are important? Where does that come from? Why?
I think the lifestyle of worship idea really is based out of it. It would be better said a heart of worship. Rather than a lifestyle of worship. Yes. I get the lifestyle of worship, but I think what the people are trying to communicate is a heart of worship.
Yes.
So I'm always looking for a place and a time to worship.
Right.
So, it doesn't take me, literally Sunday mornings on the way to church, it doesn't take much at all for me to turn on worship music. And before I ever get out of the driveway, I'm already feeling the presence of God because I try to maintain a heart of worship.
Yeah.
So that literally I'm very sensitive. So you probably heard about the people that in the old days would pick the locks on safes and they would file their fingertips down to get any kind of callus off.
Really?
So, and they'd put them on there as they turn it so that their fingertips could feel when those little gears would click.
No, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, so they would file their fingertips down to where they almost bleed. Wow. To keep them real sensitive, to get rid of any callus. And they put them on that safe, and as they turn that dial, when the least little bit of click in those gears, they could feel it.
Wow.
And I want to maintain a heart like that says, I want to have a heart of worship that with no callous.
Yeah.
So that the moment there's a little move of the Spirit, it's like, I felt that.
Yeah. Now that's another thing.
I haven't always been like that.
Right.
But
I think, from what Mom says, the reason she picked you was because you were worshiping.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let me tell you this.
That's the reason my wife picked me.
There was a family in Louisiana called the Fosters. He was a pastor, and he had 3 boys and a daughter, and those they're called the Foster boys. They were all, and they at church camps and conferences, man, they would shout and run, and they were like wild. And she said, I remember her saying, I want a husband like that. And I was just that sincere guy. Yeah. Literally, my dad would come to me sometimes when I'd be playing the drums because I'd be standing up and be like dancing and playing the drums, and he'd be like, hey.
Yeah.
Because I was really making kind of a commotion and kind of distracting.
Yeah. Which I talked about. Yeah.
And but I was sincere in it, but I was young.
Yeah.
I was 16 or 17 years old. But yeah, she found that I really had that sincere heart of worship. And I've just tried to foster that. And you go through seasons where you lose it, but then you got to file those fingers back off again, and you got to make yourself sensitive again. So I think the heart of worship is so important because that is what I believe David had, the heart of worship that says, I will worship in the field with my sheep. But then I'll also be glad when they say unto me, let us go to the house of the Lord.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to just worship by myself. I also want to worship with the fellowship of the believers.
Right.
Where he talks about let us go. And I preached about that a few weeks ago when over and over again from like Psalms 90 to 120, somewhere in there, if I'm not mistaken. All those chapters were called the Songs of Ascent as they're going to the house of the Lord. And this is a communal worship, like let's all go. We're going together. So,
right.
I just think that heart of worship, the communal worship, all of that is just so important.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, and I think you said something there that it's sort of along those same lines that I kind of want to dig down on. The idea of when you feel the presence of God or when you feel the Spirit move, because I think that's something else that a lot of people have sort of rejected maybe subconsciously, because again, you know, we've been told over and over, well, you don't have to be in church to feel God, and you don't have to be in church to, you know, God can move anywhere, and he's everywhere all the time. And at least in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well then why isn't it sort of one static? Like, why don't you always just feel him then? Like, what does that mean? You know, is that, and so then people begin to chalk up those moments of, you know, response, or when the Spirit moves to, oh, well, this must just be emotional, or it must just, again. So when you say when the Spirit moves, like, how do you think about that? Like, what?
Well, you know, I don't know how to explain this. I try to keep my emotions, so I can be very, I'm just trying to figure out how to say this.
Yeah.
So for those of you watching and listening, we don't rehearse any of this.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We sit down and we just start talking. So by nature, I have a tendency to be emotional. I can laugh really big, and I can get, in my human nature, I'll get really angry. God's helping me to work this. So what I try to do is I've tried to take those emotions that would be attached to the feelings of the flesh.
Yeah.
Great joy, great anger, great pain, sorrow, happiness. And I've tried to attach them to what is happening in the spirit world. Because I want to attach my emotions. I don't want it to be a mechanical thing.
Yeah.
I want it to be an emotional thing, like you were talking about. Sunday,
right.
That's what you were really talking about.
Yeah.
When you were talking about physical, you weren't just talking about just physically making motions. You were talking about emotionally engaging. And so that's what that's what I've tried to do, is to attach my emotions, who in my flesh would go the wrong direction. Attach them to the Spirit so that that my emotions will go in the right direction.
Right.
And so I think just figuring out which way your emotions lean, and then lean them toward the Lord.
Yeah.
And just say, I'm going to get emotional about the things of God. But you have to practice that.
Yeah.
Like you said. You said that very well with that story of when you were just a little guy at the Woodville Mall. You have to practice that. And a lot of people will practice that. So why at a baseball game do they start going do 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 do?
Right.
Because what they're doing is they're energizing the people. They're energized to get them emotionally engaged.
Yeah.
Why do they do the 7-inning stretch and everybody gets up and sings a song?
Right. Or you think about even music in a movie.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly, because they want that they engage the emotion.
Yeah.
But somehow we've been taught to, I say we, as in Christianity in general, is do not engage the emotion with God.
Right. Yeah, there's some sort of like...
There's been a disconnect of some kind.
I think in response to seeing... I think people took the opinion that emotions are unwieldy. They're sort of uncontrollable. They're the things that get us in trouble. Like I was talking about, the angry, the negative. Yeah. And so what do you do then? You, instead of learning to tame your emotions, keep emotions, but project them in a particular way.
Lead them in another direction.
You kill off emotion.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people who have seen sort of the danger of emotions, they get into sort of that stoicism thing, you know, and that's sort of what I was talking about with the two types of churches.
Yeah, that's
You've
true.
got the one type that has almost no discernment, they're going to let whatever happen. Then you've got the other type who's seeing that danger.
Yeah.
They sort of break into that like stoicism thing where, like, you know, the Stoics were that like philosophy group that thought, you know, we're going to turn off emotion. Emotion is the enemy. And I think that's just as dangerous. I think what you're talking about is a really interesting idea, is like, you know, you take your emotion, you still have emotion, you still engage your emotion, but you command your emotion.
That's a good word right there. You command your emotions rather than your emotions commanding you.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of the nutshell of what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And all that.
Because you think about like, I think, again, going back to that manipulation thing, people think like, oh, well, it's manipulation. And it's like, yeah, in a sense, like when they play, you know, music in a movie, like, yes, they're manipulating you, but it's not in a
facetious way or a negative way.
Malicious way.
Malicious.
That's the word. Yeah, exactly. It's not in a malicious way. You know, I've often said this about cults. You know, people are like, "Are you a part of a cult?" And I'm like, "Can it be a benign cult?" Because I think like happy cults are great. You know, like I don't think there's anything. You know, if they're not doing anything wrong, like be a part of a cult. It's great. You know, if like you want to drink kombucha in the desert or whatever, like anyway. But yeah, I mean, I guess in a sense it is manipulation when you play music and you draw out emotion, but I don't think all manipulation, just strictly using that term, is negative.
Right.
I think sometimes you're drawing your emotion in a certain direction.
Now, see, to me, what you just said was the same thing: manipulation and drawing your emotions in a certain direction.
Yeah.
This sounds so. Drawing your emotions in a certain direction sounds so much more spiritual, and holy, and really like, But if you take manipulation, which is exactly what you're saying, it's like, no,
not manipulation. Yeah, exactly. Because I think there's so much. Because it's true. Yes, technically, when we do a worship song, technically we are trying to manipulate the emotion. Like there's no way to get around that. But it's not. But that's not a negative thing,
right?
Manipulate has a negative connotation, but manipulate is
to
just
move people.
Yeah, it's just like when the potter, you know, he's manipulating the clay, right? That doesn't mean he's tricking it or he's
out to make it bad.
Yeah, he's promising something that he's not going to deliver, but he's shaping that clay, being purposeful about what the shape that he brings to it and the purpose that it'll serve, you know? And I think that's I think manipulation, yes, it is manipulation, but you want to manipulate
it's drawing in, Well, if you don't manipulate, again, this goes back to commanding your emotions. If you don't manipulate your emotions in one direction, somebody somewhere will manipulate them in another, even if it's yourself. Yeah. And your epigenetics or your your family heritage or whatever that is. So you've got to let your emotions be leaned or directed in the right direction.
So I think people try and oftentimes kill off emotions, but emotions were created just like the body was created, just like the soul was created. You know, I think that's been the big mistake of Christianity over the last 200 or 300 years. I think is we've taken everything and it's all about the soul. You know, emotions, body, all of this stuff, none of it matters, and it really should be done away with. It's the soul, you know, and I don't think that's true. I think God created the mind, the will, the emotions, the spirit, the soul, and the body, and all of that he wants to utilize. He wants to engage with. He wants to shape. He wants to manipulate. He wants to bring all of that into submission to him, you know, and I think worship really, in a way, that is part of worship's goal. Is to bring us into alignment with him. You know, so
true. Well, there's a huge worship movement that's been happening over the last probably 10 years. But in reality, a generation ago, 50, 60 years ago, 50 years ago probably. No, it could be 60 years ago in the 60s. 50 years ago, there was a worship movement happening. Yeah. The church wasn't ready for it. And they just pushed all these people away. You know, this is when the Jesus people and the hippies and well, I've always wondered if God came around and said, "This is what I want to do," and the people were like, "No, that doesn't fit our songbooks," because back then that's what you did. Or the other side was choirs. Yeah. You know, and even though Vineyard Church was started out of that, Calvary Chapel, organization was started out of that, still, even a lot of that went more word-oriented because we got to control. Yeah. And I think there's another worship thing that's happening right now, and my concern is that we don't miss it. Yeah. It opens our hearts, it prepares our minds, it moves us into places that we couldn't get any other way. Yeah, yeah. So,
well, you know what? I think the thing is, it came with baggage and packaging that the church didn't want, you know? And there was a lot of...
That's true.
I think there was a lot of legitimate reasons to be nervous about all these hippies coming in and having long hair and doing all this, they're gonna, because I think there's legitimate concerns to that, like, well, you can't just like do whatever you want, like you can't just you still have to be a Christian, you still have to live according to the Bible, live according to the word, all of that stuff, but I think what's interesting is that same movement has become the standard of worship for the world, because Bethel.
What do you mean standard of worship for the world?
So
the Christian world?
Yeah.
Oh, the Christian world. Okay.
Yeah. So
you're exactly right.
They supply. So Bethel came hard out of the Jesus movement. Jesus culture came out of the Jesus movement. A lot of the festivals, the Christ fests, and things like that, where all the big worship people go, those came hard out of the Jesus movement.
They've just been kind of laying dormant or kind of hidden away for 40, 50 years.
Even if you think about like Hillsong.
That's
yes,
true.
they were AG, they were Assemblies of God, but look at them.
Yeah.
In the 90s, they were coming straight out of the Jesus people. The Jesus people had, and so something came out of that ill-packaged, baggage-laden movement. Yeah. And I think, honestly, right now, there's still, because it's coming out of Bethel, it's coming out of those same places.
Yeah, it is.
It's coming out of Bethel, it's coming out of a lot of those.
But they have pushed in spiritual warfare relentless.
Yeah.
I mean, just keep pushing, keep praying, keep preaching, just keep at it, And what it's done is it's now taking over.
Yeah.
But because this Sean guy that's running around.
Sean Foyt.
Where's he out of?
Yeah. So he's out of Bethel.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Sunday, he said we're going to have a couple of thousand people show up in Washington, D.C. on the mall to worship.
Yeah.
They had over 15,000.
Oh, well, here, I'll read the article. So this is from CBN News. It's titled "God's Moving in America." Over 35,000 lift up Jesus in "Let Us Worship" rally at the mall.
Wow!
So here's what it says: the National Mall in Washington D.C. was overflowing with love for the Lord Sunday night and this is a Christian website, obviously.
Right.
So they're going to use that language night during the "Let Us Worship" tour led by praise leader Sean Foyt. Sean Foyt actually also ran for office in California.
I thought so, but he didn't get it.
Well, he needs to cut his hair. I mean, that's just going to have to happen. You can't, you can't take those curls into office, but
unless you take them in a paper bag.
yeah, exactly. I'm not trying to be mean. God bless them. Lead worship however you want, but you got to cut your hair to get in office. Anyway, more than 35,000 gathered on the iconic grassy lawn to pray for a spiritual awakening and hearts will turn toward Jesus Christ.
Which is where your mom and I just went for the prayer movement.
Yes.
There was one report said 100,000. Now, 2-3 weeks later, you've got another 35,000 people showing up.
The event opened with Foyt thanking all attendees for coming out during the cold, rainy weather to lift up America during these challenging times. The sea of worshipers sang and danced, while some of them held signs and flags that read "Jesus 2020" and "Jesus Matters."
Oh, wow.
Let's not talk about that. Several special guests appeared during the worship event to celebrate the powerful move of God. Shortly after voting to advance the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett, it gets into some political stuff, took the stage to pray for God's Spirit to spread across the high court, across America, and for people to know and to love Jesus. America needs that love, Hawley said. I don't know. Looks like his name's Josh Hawley. They need to feel the love of Jesus Christ. They need that hope and joy that we have.
So Lou Engle was there. He's like a prayer and worship. I mean, I'm saying this respectfully, maniac. I mean, he's like, he don't hesitate. Jensen Franklin was there praying. He's been calling America to prayer and worship.
And fasting. His big thing's fasting. Yeah.
And then Sean was there. But it was like, Aaron here on our comment says that it went for 4 hours.
Yeah.
They had worship for 4 hours last night.
Wow.
And I got to watch a little bit of it.
We watched about an hour and a half of it.
Really?
Yeah. And so they were talking about, I mean, what they got coming up, man, I would love to be a part of, but it's so New Year's Eve going into 2021, they are trying to get, I think it's like 10,000 people. I'm sure they'll overshoot that goal though on Azusa. On Azusa Street. Yeah. So I was telling Brooke a little bit about, and she's heard of it, all that, but I was telling her a little bit about the Azusa Street and what that means to Pentecostals and,
Yeah, that's a big deal.
That whole thing. And it's just, it's really powerful to see this strain of Christianity just sort of,
and
take
man,
the
they are
forefront
serious
in this
about about the Holy Spirit,
Absolutely.
speaking in tongues,
Yeah.
the gifts of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not like just worshiping and singing songs.
Yeah.
I mean, they're prophesying. They are praying.
Well, that's Bethel. I mean, and
I know
that's what I was going to say
true.
about the baggage, actually, is like I think it's coming again with some baggage. I think not everybody likes the way that Bethel does things. You know,
Yeah.
I think it has that spiritual warfare side of that mixed with, temperamentally, hippies are open in nature to new experiences, to things that not everybody else understands, all of that type of thing. And so I think that has led them down a path which has really made them somewhat of a pariah in certain Christian circles. But I think I would vote with you that we can't let that baggage stop, because this is real, man. This is what Jesus said. I think we're so nervous about false teachers and false preachers that we got to check every point of theology of people before they get it, which obviously people who've heard this podcast, they probably think we're on the other side of that extreme, but I think tends to be like people want to check every point of theology of somebody who comes, but I think the false teachers will say something other than Jesus is God.
Right.
That's the point.
Which is what Jesus said.
That's the point.
Jesus said, this is how you differentiate right here.
Yeah.
If they don't say that I am Lord, if they don't say that I have come to earth to save humanity, then they're not of me.
Right.
That's the only criteria.
And then
when
when his disciples come, and think about Jesus' disciples' theology at this point. They didn't even understand what he came to do until after he died.
Yeah.
So even they don't have a great theology or Christology, whatever you'd call it. And then they come to him saying, there are some other disciples of John the Baptist, and they're baptizing in your name. Should we stop them? And he's like, if they're not against me, they are for me.
Yeah.
That's what he says. If they're not against me, they are for me. So then the question is, well, if even his disciples didn't yet understand what he was coming to do, surely these other disciples who are baptizing in his name didn't have a robust New Testament teaching theology. Paul hadn't written his letters. Jesus hadn't died and been resurrected. So at that point, it was about Jesus. And so I think we have to, while yes, continuing to correct on things that we disagree with, continuing to push forward truth, continuing to read and soak in the scriptures, we still have to be able to say, if you're saying Jesus Christ is Lord, we're with you.
Yep.
We're with you and you're with us.
And we don't have to understand your approach. We don't have to even agree with your approach, but I'm not going to fight you.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to speak against you.
Yeah.
So Sunday, I'm preaching on bold convictions. Bold convictions.
Man, that's going to be a tough one.
And we're going to talk about how that, and one of the things I'm bringing in is personal convictions, and personal convictions should be kept personal. That's why they're personal convictions.
Yeah.
I mean, because if God gives you a conviction about this, and then all of a sudden you're trying to make, and I'm going to differentiate between what's what's a biblical conviction, what's a church conviction, and what's a personal conviction. And many times we'll try to bleed those over if we're not careful. So we should all have and I'm going to preach a little bit of a message now, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We should all, the biblical conviction, Jesus is Lord, Bible is true, must be born again.
Yeah.
Life transformation, all of that's biblical conviction. The church has to have the biblical conviction. But that doesn't mean that's all it has, because some cultures would require to say, but it's also our conviction that we do this.
Right.
Just as a church. We're not asking every church in the world to do this. We're not saying everybody's going to hell because they don't believe just like we do. Whatever that is. It could be.
Well, you think about the convictions of the early church when they decided what would be the law, and they came up with the 4 rules.
Yeah.
And the only one that we still even pay attention to is the sexual immorality. Don't be sexually immoral. The other 3 just have nothing to do with our culture.
Right.
But for
so
them, they had decided. Yeah.
Then there's the personal. And again, the personal has to have all of the biblical convictions. But then there should be these convictions. And if you're a part of a church, which you should be, you should support those convictions. And then you should have even other convictions that you're saying, you know what, our family just doesn't do that. Yeah. We just don't use that language, or we don't watch those kinds of movies, or, we don't do this or do that, whatever that is. And I'm just think it's important for people to understand is that your whole relationship with God should not be based on a set of rules that come from the Bible, nor should it come from a set of rules that come from the church.
Right.
It should be part of those things, convictions, but it should be things that you hold dear in your heart.
Yeah.
That when you go to the grave, you can say, I held true to that conviction.
Right.
You know?
Here's what I think. Here's what I think you should do. Okay, and I know you're on 3, which is really good. That's the lucky number of all preachers.
Is there a 4?
3. I think there should be a 4th.
All right, what is that?
Because I think you could talk about biblical. I think you could talk about cultural, and then I think you could talk about community convictions, right? So
instead of church.
Well, I think what you're describing as church, I would describe as cultural. So, like, there are certain things that the whole Western church, agrees that, there are certain things that we're all, even though it's not strictly biblical, it's not. There are certain things that we all agree, like, this is how we should conduct ourselves, Right. So, like, certain lines for modesty or things like that. But then there are also things within your local community that this church, right? So Life Chapel, that's kind of what I was talking about with our worship. There are certain things where it's even just this church where it's important. And I think the reason it's important is for cohesion. I think it's important because I think God calls groups to. That's where you could get into the Levitical church thing.
Right.
God's called certain subgroups to accomplish certain things, and not everybody's meant to accomplish that. That doesn't mean they're all lost.
Right.
And I think that's important to understand. And then from there down to a personal, personal thing.
I think I may do that. Yeah. Because that does make a little more. It just kind of gives a little more clarity. And
that's what I think. This is a season where I think we are coming to understand, after coming out of a denomination that sort of came pre-loaded with a lot of those things. Yeah, we are coming to understand that we can have things that not everyone else is going to believe.
And they matter to us.
And they matter to us.
And we don't make them matter to other people.
Right. And so if you want to be a part of this body, we ask you to buy into those things. And I think this is a season where we're learning that and teaching that.
And part of that would be, for instance, worship.
Right. Exactly.
Our local community. Yeah. We're intense on worship. We're strong in the Word. We're Levitical people. I mean, all of those things are important. So,
because I think there was sort of this movement of sort of the whole church, the church at large took on a lot of superfluous things, right? Like a lot of things that we reject now and sort of we don't even talk about, like dressing up at church or, sitting in pews as opposed to chairs, things like that.
Exactly.
All of these things seemed so necessary. And so when we threw those out, I think a lot of churches moved to sort of a bare minimum standard.
Yeah.
It's just like, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to buy into anything. Right. Well, what that resulted in is just a breakdown of tight community bonds.
Right. Because within, and this is why, and we maybe have been a little overprotective, but this is why we've been pretty protective of what we call our DNA.
Right.
Which is this right here, because we want that cohesion. We want people to be bonded together. We want people to be in this, like, we're fighting for the same cause.
Yeah.
And if you just kind of let everybody come and believe what you will and kind of float along, and you get pockets of people that have all kinds of various doctrines that before long begin to compete.
Or that I think oftentimes have no doctrines at all.
This is true.
I think that's sort of the problem.
No convictions at all.
If there's a, and I'm not saying like all mega churches are problematic or whatever, but if there's a problem with that style of church, the problem is that a lot of people that attend might agree on the Jesus thing, but that hasn't filtered into their life in any way other than sort of big general, like be generous and things like that.
Do good stuff.
And so now they have no community bonds. So now when a more forceful, so I'm sort of getting a revelation on this. Now when a more forceful cohesion happens, so your PTA is like, no, you have to accomplish this many things, or your, mom group or your kids soccer team or whatever, when they have a longer list of things that you have to do now all of a sudden that becomes your group.
Yeah.
Because you need to be asked to give into the group, Yeah. And so
that's true.
I think it's important for churches to be able to admit, no, this isn't salvation thing. You can go somewhere else and not do a ton of this stuff, you know? But this is an us thing. Yeah. And we are a family, and so this is what we do as a family, So
yeah. And I think setting the bar high is important, but not demanding everybody jump it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Is that if you want to be in leadership, yes. You want to be in a teaching position, yes.
Yeah.
But we'll set the bar low coming in. But the longer you stay, the higher we raise that bar.
Yeah, that's
because
good.
we want people to walk in high levels of commitment and consecration because it just matters.
That's always been a culture here. I think we're just now sort of putting words to it. But I was telling somebody just last week, we were talking about like cussing.
Yeah.
You know? And we were talking about, somebody said, well, like, you know, cussing is a sin. And someone else was like, well, I cuss, you know, blah, blah. So anyway, there was sort of this back and forth. But, you know, while we were talking, what I was saying is like, I don't know that I could biblically prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that cussing is a sin the same way that like sexual immorality is a sin.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't know that there's such a clear line on that, but I don't care. That's not the way I was ever taught to approach the world. You know what? I don't approach the world at the bare minimum standard, like trying to avoid sin. Like I approach the world in a way where I want to live above that. You know, I want to live a lifestyle that I'm not watching for the bottom line all the time, you know, like, oh man, I crossed into sin. It's like, I want to live with standards to where, you know, maybe you could call it a hedge of protection, you know, that would be like a Christian-y way to say it, you know, like I want a good solid hedge there where my lifestyle is built. So even if I skew from my standard every once in a while, or even if I say shoot or what a moron, you know, like I don't have to be super worried about.
Or if you feel like cussing.
Yeah.
Because there's a few times I feel like cussing, but I don't let myself because now this is where, so, and we're taking a rabbit trail here.
Yeah,
but
that's all right.
This is where the law gives us like 610 laws.
Yeah.
But then there became the secondary law that the Levites put into place, and they were guardrail laws.
Yes.
Like to keep them from breaking the law.
And this is what the Pharisees were. That's what the Pharisees were.
The Pharisees were that group of people that had a certain, but the Sadducees had another set. So that's what made them kind of enemies, because they said one thing, they said another. And so what would happen is, like, for instance, don't work on the Sabbath. Well, then they said if you walked more than 3/4 of a mile or thereabouts, you know.
Yeah. That counts as work.
You were working. So then they said, if you walk more than 3/4 of a mile, you're sinning. It progressed to that point.
Yeah.
And so what's important is that we don't progress to that point, is that we understand these are hedges, these are protectives.
Yes.
We're not making them rules for everybody in the world to follow. But this is what we choose to do because we would rather get into heaven and have a mile to spare than to miss it by an inch.
And really, that's the heart of living for God. I mean, it's not about having not made the big mistakes.
Yeah.
It's about wanting to be a part of His kingdom.
Well, it's that heart of worship.
Yeah, and it's about
where's
leaving.
Your heart?
It's about leaving everything else behind and not even worrying about it. You know, and I think that becomes a big part of stuff.
Yeah,
so,
not wanting to identify with that stuff.
Anyway, you're welcome for your sermon on Sunday.
Yeah,
you can have.
I'm
going to
have to give you a fee for that one, huh?
Yeah. So, all right. Well, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up and pray it out?
Yeah, Father, we just thank you for our time together. We thank you, Lord, for this discussion tonight, and I'm just asking you, Lord, to give us as the leadership of Life Chapel, but also all of those who are watching and listening. Let us, Lord, find that heart of worship. Let us become men and women who live out worship, but not just independently, not just in a solo fashion, but, Lord, with one another in community. And we're just asking you to give us grace to go forward in faith in Jesus' name.